want to give a shout out to my new Patreon member, Buer. Your donation is gladly appreciated.
Welcome to the world of Tales from the Crypt.
I have been using diphenhydramine for a while, usually taking doses ranging from 250 to 1500 milligrams. I had done it enough times that on 500 milligrams, I could act completely normal. I did a take-home test once on this much and got the highest score in the class. This weekend was different though. My parents had searched my room and discovered over 100 DPH pills, DXM products, and ephedrine tablets 2 weeks earlier, and I hadn't done it since then. They had taken my money, but I found enough quarters when my friend was over to get one box of 32 50 milligram gel caps. We bought it, and I took 20 and she took 12. This was at 9 o'clock. It kicked in around 9:30. I remember being extremely confused. I kept asking my friend to go downstairs, which was stupid, since my parents were there and we couldn't even stand up. This is the last thing I remember. The rest of this story is from what my parents and my friend told me, and the small parts I happen to remember. My friend told me she wanted to go outside because she wanted a cig. I got up and I fell to the floor. My eyes closed and I started to shake really hard. She was hallucinating at this point, but still did everything she could to help me. She tried waking me up and got to the point of slapping me. Then my eyes opened and foam and blood started coming out of my mouth. My brother came into the room to check on us and found me looking like this. He woke my parents and told them to come look at me. My mom freaked. She wanted me to go to the hospital, but my dad and brother decided I needed to get into the shower, so they threw me in with my clothes on and realized I was really fucked up. I spoke of nothing but a sound, kind of like, just weird words. They brought me to the hospital. I was in the emergency room with 5 nurses all trying to hold me down and figure out what I was on. My parents left because they remembered my friend was still at my house. I got my stomach pumped. I ended up throwing up all over myself during this time. They gave me charcoal and a drug to help flush it out of my system. I also had a tube put in me so that I could pee. This is when I began to speak. My first sentence was to turn the TV off, which it was. My mom came back with my friend and they asked me if I knew who she was. I said her name and just stared at her for about 10 minutes until they decided to leave. I woke up the next morning having no idea I was even at the hospital. I noticed the tube between my legs and tried to pull it out, but I realized whatever it was wanted to stay there. They came in to give me breakfast and it all began to sink in. I ate everything they gave me and then I went back to sleep. This was Friday night. I had to stay there until Sunday. I have to see a therapist every week and I'm soon going to see a therapist just for the drug use. I'm on antidepressants, which is really stupid, since the only reason I am on them is because my mom believes it was an attempted suicide. I have no idea what caused this. I had taken the pills so many times in higher doses with nothing going wrong. I guess it was because I had waited 2 weeks and then took the entire dose in about a minute. I'm not sure, but I'll hopefully never want to take them again. I never thought this would happen to me, but it did, and now I know that it can. I hope everyone that does this realizes it could take their life, and they have to be willing to realize That can be the consequence. I just tripped on 500 milligrams of diphenhydramine last night. I have heard of people and done some research about tripping on Benadryl prior to my experience. I first decided to start slow, only taking 4 before not feeling any effects. I took 4 more, waited, then I took 8 more. As I began to feel the effects, I took 4 more. Each tablet is 25 milligrams of diphenhydramine, the active chemical in Benadryl, or should I say, poison. To give you some context, I am in my sophomore year of high school and have some problems with anxiety. My experience started off by me arriving back home from school around 4 o'clock. Today, I did not have work. Normally, I will get together with a few friends and smoke weed at whoever had the house to themselves. However, today, everyone seemed to be out. I figured that I would just save the rest of mine to smoke later that night. Planning to have a fun night, I got all my homework out of the way, so I would not get bothered about it later. Around 8 o'clock, I ran to the nearest Walgreens to buy a 25-pack of Benadryl. I am quite familiar with the medicine as I take them when I get bad allergies. I never knew something I have taken my whole life could be so dangerous. The nightmare of a trip started at around 9 when I ingested 4, waited, took 4 more, and then after a while of still not feeling any of the hallucinations I was informed would occur when taking in large doses, I swallowed 8 more and chased it with some cold water. About 30 minutes after taking in 16 tablets, I started to get this strange feeling as I felt my weight double and gravity was pulling me down much harder. I shrugged it off and began to play Xbox. After about 30 minutes of playing Xbox, I decided I had to go use the bathroom. As I walked to my upstairs bathroom, I felt extremely dizzy and lightheaded. I credited these effects to my empty stomach as I had not yet eaten dinner. Mind you, my parents were not home as they were at a wedding. They came back today. I have not told them about the experience I'm about to share. As I am walking downstairs to the kitchen, I feel a slight ringing in my ears. I made a plate of pizza rolls and continued on. After I ate, I decided to go take 4 more, as I have not felt any effects other than dizziness and a slight headache. At this point during my trip, I began to feel a sense of confusion, like, what did I even take? I had forgotten how to wash the dishes and clean up my kitchen. After eventually cleaning the kitchen, I decided to go smoke the rest of the weed I had left. I grabbed some sweatpants, put on my camo jacket, grabbed the 4 tablets I had left, and got in my truck. At first, right when I got in my truck, I was confused on why I didn't just smoke on my back porch, but a voice in my head insisted that I go in the back parking lots of an abandoned strip mall not even a half a mile from my house. My parents do not condone me smoking weed, so I have to hide all of my setup in different places in my neighborhood. I went place to place getting my bag of weed, lighter, and my geeb setup. As I am going to get my setup, a deer ran out right in front of my truck. I slammed on the brakes as hard as I ever have. I assure you, a half a second later, I would have had deer guts oozing from my truck. I waited for it to cross, but it just stood there, staring right into my soul. I got out of my truck and approached the deer. As I got about 5 feet away from it, it disappeared into thin air. I ran back to my truck, got in, locked the doors, and pulled into the parking lot. I was borderline freaking out at this point. Now mind you, I have had no experience with any psychedelic drugs at all. That is the moment I knew I took too much and too quickly. To calm my nerves, I started pulling a few geebs. I look in my rearview mirror and see my mom and dad sitting behind me in the cab of my truck, not talking to me, just staring. I blinked and they vanished. I figured that I needed to calm down, so I began pulling more geebs. After I was done smoking, I got out of my truck to dump all the water out and walked to a trash can to throw my supersized Circle K cup away. As I am walking to the trash can, a car comes up to me. I soon realized that it was my mom. I walked up to the driver's side window to talk to her. As I went to the window, she and her car vanished into thin air. I dropped everything I had in my hands and began to freak out. It was pitch black out, and I dropped my phone, so I couldn't see a thing. I finally felt around until I came across my phone. As soon as I reached down to pick it up, everything felt like it shifted into 2D. I could not even pick up my phone, no matter what I tried. I began to hear my dad scream from the other side of the parking lot. "What the fuck are you doing out here, son?" I walked over towards him, dragging my phone with my foot across the parking lot until I was within arm's length of my dad. We had a full-on conversation about what I was doing. I remember him saying to me, which made me go completely insane when I thought about it. The words he said to me gave me chills and still does to this day. He asked, "He told you to come here too?" At first when he said it, I didn't really understand what he was saying until he vanished and I realized that this poison was toying with my head. I take my jacket off, wrap my phone around it, and booked it back to my truck. At this point, I am in no state of mind at all to drive even a half a mile back to my home. I got back in my truck and started listening to music. Then about 5 minutes later, I hear a loud thud on my back windows. I see my mom walk up to me and ask if I'm enjoying it. I step out of my truck and poof, she's gone. I set an hour timer, turn off my truck, and recline my seat all the way back. I was lying down in complete and utter darkness, stoned and tripping out of my mind. I somehow managed to get about 40 minutes of sleep until my alarm woke me back up. I was still in a very confused state. I had completely forgot that I even took the Benadryls. I started driving the half a mile back to my house, and I look in my rearview mirror and see what had to be 10 cars that were the same exact car as my dad's. I focused back on the road, then quickly glanced back, and they were gone. I pulled up to my house and saw both my mom and dad's cars at the house. Just to make sure I wasn't being tricked again, I go to touch both of their cars, and yet again, they vanished. Before I walked back inside, I had to make sure I didn't leave my phone or anything else in my truck. As I am rummaging through my pockets to find my house key, my dog comes out of the dog door and starts sprinting in circles around me. I got her to sit, and as I went to pet her, she vaporized, just like everything else before. It took me a few minutes to figure out how to unlock my front door, but after that, I returned to my room and watched a movie. The last thing I remember that happened to me before I went to sleep is my mom coming into my room, telling me good night. As she came to hug me, she vanished. The next morning, I woke up with the driest cotton mouth and the most painful headache I've ever had. Thankfully, I called my mom and was able to convince her that I had the flu. Today, I rested, hydrated, and threw the remaining Benadryls I had into a fire pit in my backyard. Diphenhydramine is not a psychedelic. It is a poison that causes delirium and hallucinations so vivid you think they are real. This poison is not one to be messed with. I'm not telling people not to try it. You can do whatever you want. Just be safe and do not drive like I did in that situation. Please stay safe out there. I must admit, this is the most horrible thing I have ever done in my entire life. I tried to commit suicide. Of course, I was unsuccessful. It wasn't only the fact that I tried to kill myself, it was the ignorant way in which I proceeded to do it. It all started with my own depression, a normal teenage problem, and it ended in an awful way. I was over a friend's house and I couldn't sleep. I have really bad insomnia. I decided to take a couple of Tylenol PMs, although they never really worked for me. So I took a few at about 1 a.m. Well, I was feeling tired and restless at the same time. I lost my temper and I proceeded to pick up the bottle and take 25 more of them. Big mistake. I still don't remember all of what happened after that, but I know bits and pieces. I started feeling an intense wave of the normally small sleeping pill effect. It was so intense, I thought in my mind that I would overdose and slowly just go to sleep and never wake up. But to my shock, I never fell asleep. I wound up going to the bathroom feeling very nauseated and puking, and I remember seeing the little blue dots floating in my vomit. I eventually got very scared and woke my friend up. I felt so strange. Things were normal, but they looked different. I couldn't tell the difference between reality and non-reality. I woke her up and told her I took 25 sleeping pills. She then went and, of course, told her parents. I remember talking to them, but I didn't make any sense. I would start out to say something, and I would try to make a point, but it would come out all wrong, making me feel stupid. I talked on and on about many different things, but I was delirious, and I don't remember what I said. But I was told later that I said I had a C-section, and that I had an invisible mask, and that when I put it on, I became invisible. Her parents were terrified, and they called my dad from work. He came to see what was going on, and I thought he was someone else. I kept talking about my dad in the third person. There is a time period I can't remember, and I'm glad I don't, because from what I've already heard, I would be even more embarrassed. My dad was super scared, so he took me to the hospital. There, they asked me questions about what year it was and things like that. I answered those fine. They did all the necessary stuff, and I wound up being hooked to a bed for 2 days with a catheter and some kind of hose coming from each hole in my body. I then had to explain why I took half a bottle of medicine. They then proceeded to put me in an ambulance where I was taken to the mental hospital, where I was forced to stay for 5 days. This, by far, was the worst experience in my life. If I could give advice to anyone about this drug, I would say, stay away from it. I couldn't control my actions. I became psychotic and scared the shit out of people. I later found out about the drug I had taken and read other people's experiences and found out it was just like mine. Let me make one final thing clear. I was not trying to experiment with a hallucinogen. I wanted to die. That is the only reason I took 25 sleeping pills. I have to say at the time, this stuff happened when I was a heavy insomniac. The job I held, and I won't say for fear of losing anonymity, I couldn't go to a doctor for a safe sleep aid for fear of losing my job. Also, at work, I suffered from repeated, what I'll just call, assaults. I still believe, and my family believes, that I have PTSD from these assaults. I've read stories of people getting violent or crashing their cars on this stuff. I'm so lucky that I never drove or got violent. My worst times, it made me exhibit extremely paranoid, psychotic, schizophrenic-like symptoms. Delirium so bad that I would have full-blown external hallucinations of people I knew and hold full conversations with them. One night, I got into an especially anxious, paranoid state. I left my room, walked 5 minutes to the Subway restaurant through the dark, late night, walking past trees that I believe were full of shadow people wanting to kill me. I sat outside the Subway for 4 hours, hallucinating people and talking to them, too scared to walk back to my room for fear of being taken by the shadow people. A separate time, I had dosed high, then locked myself out of my room. I had to beg a neighbor for a pair of shoes so I could walk outside in the pouring rain to get a replacement key card. I still hadn't fully lost it. It was probably about 45 minutes since I downed the last pill. Still, on the way back, I slipped walking off a curb and landed on the back of my head, losing consciousness instantly. I suffered a nasty concussion. When I regained consciousness in the ambulance, I was so hysterical that they had to give me Valium to calm down. Another time, it made me comatose in bed with serious muscle spasms and twitches. If I tried to stand up, I would immediately fall to the floor and stay there convulsing for minutes, maybe hours. I can't say for sure. As soon as I got back into bed, I stayed there for fear of arousing the same spasms again. I ended up losing control of my bladder. Just don't do it. Who knows what the long-term results will be for me? Dementia runs in my family, and now I'm reading shit online that suggests heavy DPH use increases risk of dementia. Dementia is just so heartbreaking. My grandfather had it bad before he passed away, and now I'm looking at the possibility of developing it as soon as my 50s. There are so many other drugs that you can take to quote-unquote trip that are much safer. I don't push drugs or give explicit sources to people who want to use them, but if you must trip, onions are your friend, as Psych Substance on YouTube said. Just don't do DPH. I have been recreationally using diphenhydramine for about 3 years now. I would take 300 to 650 milligrams of Benadryl 3 to 5 times a week, a few hours before I fell asleep. I have tripped on Benadryl probably on these doses about 500 times in the past 3 years. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop taking it. The trips are horrible and terrifying, even worse than Datura or any other plant containing atropine. I first started taking it as a sleep aid until I heard from a friend it gives you an LSD-like trip, which is entirely untrue, and I've always wanted to try acid. So after already taking it as a sleep aid for maybe 6 months, I tried tripping on it. I took 10 25 milligram pills, totaling 250 milligrams. I loved it. It was so relaxing, and the hallucinations were wonderful. But that only happened the first year or so of my tripping. I think I may have grew extremely mentally dependent on it over about a year. The trips just got worse and worse, but I kept upping my doses with no reason. I remember one time when I took 26 25 milligram Benadryls, 650 milligrams. I didn't even know where I was. I was literally in another dimension. I saw a man in a top hat just rocking back and forth in a rocking chair in my basement. The next day when I woke up, I was still tripping. I think this was actually the peak. I watched my walls like a TV because of all the patterns and movements that were on them. I tripped all that day and a little bit into the next day. The last time I took it, I took 12 pills, 300 milligrams, a fairly small dose for me. It was the weirdest experience of Benadryl I've ever had. Instead of getting tired like I usually do, I couldn't sleep. I could barely stand sitting. My whole body literally vibrated. I didn't know what went wrong. I haven't tripped on it in about 4 days, and I never plan to again. I still feel fucked up from it. I get extreme headaches that low-grade painkillers barely help. I feel like my body, mainly my head, is constantly shaking. I have very fucked up vision, but for some reason, only in my left eye. I also have trouble focusing, muscle cramps, muscle spasms, and constant hallucinations that are very similar to those of a Benadryl trip. I originally thought it may have developed a brain tumor, but my doctor assured me that I was too young. I am only 15. I demanded a CAT scan or an MRI, but he said no. I have been doing more research on what could be wrong with me. I think I may have partial brain damage. If not a brain tumor or brain damage, something else is wrong with me. But something definitely is wrong with me. I am recovering from DPH addiction. 9 months of daily 300 to 1500 milligram doses total, redosing throughout the day, with high tolerance at the worst points, masturbating for 3 to 12 hours daily. I've never done anything more stupid in my life. It's been 2 fucking months, and the cognitive impairment is still there. First, the sexual dysfunction. My orgasms are still a lot more intense and longer than they used to be before my addiction. But what's the use when I don't even have a sex drive anymore? I have to force myself into it to even begin enjoying it. Then there are the short-term memory problems, concentration problems, dyslexia, and aphasia. If I'm watching a video or a film, I have to rewind every scene because my mind keeps drifting off and thinking about whatever. If I'm reading something, I have to read every sentence 2 or 3 times to comprehend what I just read. That brain fog is horrible. Oddly, I have no problems communicating with people in real life, but this sucks. And the fucking anhedonia. Good music sounds good, but it's not rewarding. Same for sex, food, movies, games, friends, everything. I miss being obsessed with a song and passionate about things that I perceive as meaningful. I'd do anything to have that back. And worst of all, ridiculously bad cringe attacks. I swear, my mind would just randomly remember a little ordinary situation or interaction, and I would cringe so hard, I feel like I'm fucking psychotic. And cringe attacks are pretty common, but now it's too fucking bad. I have no idea if I'm getting better. If there's any improvement, then it's so slow that I can't even notice it. The symptoms keep drastically improving and worsening for no apparent reason. I spend a lot of money on daily omega-3, paracetam, and several other nootropics and supplements, and I don't even know if they're helping. This shit is filling my mind with suicidal thoughts because honestly, if I'm not back to normal in a year, I might do it. I can't fucking live like this. I can't enjoy life at all. It's horrible. Kids, don't fucking use DPH. I'm 21 and my brain is fucked. And once you're addicted, you're a prisoner for it.